For the next few episodes, I thought I'd kick off a series called If My Channel Wasn't So Ultra Obscure, I'd Get Death Threats. It's a little clunky, but I think it works. Anyway, I'm going to be looking at 3 queer stories from the early histories of the 3 big monotheistic religions. We're dealing with figures that are so ancient and shrouded in myth and legend that there really isn't much to go on except how more modern people have interpreted their stories. So I'm not really saying that these figures were definitely queer, bisexual, etc. But instead, I'm just talking about the way their stories have been interpreted and reinterpreted across time. So with that out of the way, let's talk about Naomi, Ruth, and the book named after her, the Book of Ruth from the Hebrew Bible. The story takes place in the era of the Judges, a time when the Hebrews were a loose confederation of migrant tribes. Ruth and her sister Orpah lived in Moab, a land in modern-day Jordan that bordered on Hebrew territory, and both married 2 Hebrew brothers who came to Moab with their mother Naomi. Unfortunately, Ruth and Orpah's husbands died, which leaves them and Naomi to fend for themselves because, well, they're women living in the Iron Age. Naomi says she is leaving to return to her family in Bethlehem, and urges them to go back to their own families. Orpah reluctantly does so, but Ruth clings to Naomi and passionately vows to follow her wherever she goes. Ruth speaks not only the most famous words from the Book of Ruth, but among the most famous from the entire Bible. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. In Bethlehem, Ruth becomes a servant of the landowner Boaz, a relative of Naomi's family, and works on the wheat harvest. Boaz is kind to Ruth, praising her for her loyalty to her mother-in-law. Naomi advises her to put on her best clothes and go to the threshing floor, where Boaz was sleeping, and, quote, uncover his feet. This sounds pretty innocent, if a little weird to our modern ears, but Eerdman's commentary on the Bible has the interesting note that elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, the threshing floor is associated with extramarital sex, and feet is used as a euphemism for genitals. Whatever actually happened, there is an odd bit of a romantic comedy complication, ancient Israel style, in the form of biblical law regulating property and inheritance. Ruth is obligated to marry her father-in-law's nearest heir, who would be Boaz, except there's one man the book never names who is actually the rightful heir ahead of Boaz. Luckily, Boaz, who is properly motivated, of course, convinces this relative to relinquish his rights, freeing Boaz to marry Ruth. In the book's epilogue, the reader learns Boaz and Ruth had a son named Obed, who will become the grandfather of King David of Israel. And now you know the rest of the story. Wait. I'm sure you're saying, why are you doing this as a before Stonewall thing? I mean, the whole story is about Ruth getting a man. Well, for starters, we don't even know if Ruth and Naomi actually existed, or if they did, if their experiences were anything like the story recounted in the Book of Ruth. After all, no one even knows when the book was written. Some trace it to the 10th century BC, at the height of the Kingdom of Israel, or much later to the 4th century BC, when the Hebrews were living under foreign occupation, and as a result, some authorities were fighting against intermarriage with foreigners. So a simple story of how the beloved, celebrated King David was the result of a marriage between a Hebrew man and a foreign woman would have made a pretty powerful counterpoint. The book also seems to be an actual attempt to explain women's experiences in ancient Israel, and how to cope with a system that didn't usually work in their favor. After all, the story's plot is basically about 2 women who find ways to get around the rules in order for one of them to marry a man who genuinely cares about her, rather than the man set aside for her by tradition and law. As Eerdmans' commentary puts it, the Book of Ruth portrays a, quote, realistic strategy of poor women trying to survive in a patriarchal world. As for why and how you can interpret the book as a love story between women, Rabbi Stephen Greenberg, in his book Wrestling with God, Homosexuality in the Jewish Tradition, notes the parallel between how Ruth clings to Naomi with the book of Genesis, describing how a man clings to his wife in marriage. Also, Ruth's famous pledge to follow Naomi has a marital tinge to it, even by the standards of the Hebrew Bible. This doesn't mean that Ruth and Naomi were meant to be seen as lovers by the original author, but rather it's about how their story exemplifies love between women even today. Rabbi Greenberg phrases it this way: it is to show that erotic pull and committed love between people of the same sex were acknowledged in our sacred tradition. This is why, no matter what the authors of the Book of Ruth intended or did not intend, Ruth's immortal words to Naomi are still often used in Jewish lesbian weddings. What the story meant in its original context does matter, and I even think it can be reconstructed, at least to a degree. But it's also important how people since then have picked up on the text and the emotions it tries to invoke. This story still matters to what were almost certainly the audience the author was writing to: Jewish converts and non-Jews entering into marriage with Jewish partners. But it also matters to feminists who see the authenticity in Naomi and Ruth's struggles to cope with a world made for and by men. And it matters also to couples, gay or straight, who are moved by Ruth's declaration of lifelong loyalty. And that's what a great work of literature is supposed to do: carry different meanings for different people. Anyway, I'm off to make some more innocent narratives about male or female friendship about nasty gay sex instead. Bye!